Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Mulvihill. I'm the Executive Director of Humanities Kansas, and welcome to this month's Big Idea. We sure have some really great information to share with you today. The Big Idea is an online program that we do to highlight fresh thinking in humanities scholarship, and we're delighted that our guest today is Sheryl Wilson, Director of the Kansas Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution, who's going to talk with us about um, better understanding of what peacemaking means in the 21st century. But before we go into that, I wanted to share a couple of housekeeping reminders. We're all so familiar with Zoom these days, I hardly feel like I have to say them, but I'm going to anyway. We do ask that you keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. However, we are very interested in hearing your questions, but we ask that you put those in the chat box, and we will be referring to the chat box throughout the hour-long presentation, and we want to make sure that we get to your questions. So do keep that in mind. You can type those in whenever you think about them, and then we'll circle back for that. Now, each big idea starts with an essay, and that's just a way for us to provide that common ground for us to read in advance of today's conversation. But it may be that you didn't have time to read it, so we will put a link to Sheryl's essay in the chat box for you to refer to. Sheryl was also great to include some film clips and books and other resources for you that will help spark a conversation among you and your friends as you share with them this really neat event that you attended today at noon. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Mendoza. Valerie is the director of the Title III Strengthening Institutions Grant at Washburn University. She is a native Kansan and received her PhD in history from Berkeley. And Valerie will be interviewing our guests. So take it away, Valerie.
Thanks, Julie, and welcome everyone, and welcome Sheryl. She has written this month's Big Idea. It's time to expand our views on peacekeeping. Sheryl Wilson is the director of the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. She has been a practitioner, a trainer, an educator in restorative justice for over 15 years, and she holds a Bachelor of Science degree in mediation and communication studies and a restorative justice-based Master's of Liberal Studies degree from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. So welcome, Sheryl. My first question has to do with this concept of restorative justice. So I'm pretty familiar with mediation, I've gone through that, but less so with restorative justice, which you really talk about a lot in your Big Idea. So can you walk us through what that is?
I certainly can. I'm going to, before I start, I'm just going to say hello to everyone and thank you for being present. And I see some familiar faces. So what is restorative justice? In short, restorative justice is a holistic way of repairing harm in the aftermath of crime or wrongdoing. Many times when we look at how to examine harm, we think about there are certain questions that we ask, and they might be referred to as restorative questions. One of the people who is one of the most foremost writers and educators on restorative justice is Howard Zare, and he says, who has been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligations are these? Who has a stake in the situation? And what's an appropriate process to involve all of the stakeholders in an effort to put things right? And the stakeholders might be the person who caused the harm party, and the community that surrounds those people. And so when people engage in a restorative process, we're working toward finding a resolution for those who were harmed, but we're also working toward the healing of the whole community. And we also want to hold accountable the person who caused the harm, and they may have needs also.
Oh my
So I hope
gosh.
that answers the question.
Oh my gosh, it does so much. My mind is just like buzzing because I'm
Good.
thinking I can think of all sorts of, situations and places and people that could use like some good restorative justice work,
Good. I'm glad that that causes your head to buzz. That's what we want.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that, I think one of the most famous um, cases of restorative justice is South Africa, right?
Mhm.
Where they had those truth and reconciliation committees, and kind of that's.
Well, truth and reconciliation processes definitely connect to restorative justice, absolutely. And then some of the lesser known ways are things that are happening probably all around you that you may not even know are happening. But a lot of people who have been trained like me are working in community, like, say, in programs that do restorative justice, where a person who might be referred by the courts, instead of going before a judge. You've heard of diversion programs, right?
Yeah.
Diversion programs mean that they're not appearing before a judge. There's a chance that their record might be expunged for whatever the situation is if they follow through, and that may be a situation where the person who caused the harm may meet with the person who was harmed, and they'd have an opportunity with a facilitator like myself to talk about it. And that person, there's ways to work it out. Sometimes it is just simply like what we used to do in the old school days, where if you broke Mrs. Johnson's window, mom and dad might take you over to Mrs. Johnson's and say, "Hey, Johnny broke your window, and what can we do to fix it?" And Johnny might have to do some odd jobs, or he might have to give his allowance until he paid off the window. So there's no difference in how that's happening, but we don't have community like that anymore, right? So in some ways, we're creating that community.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept about
Yeah.
community. I like that. I'm also imagining this is like your superpower. So I'm seeing you in a superhero suit.
That is so funny that you say that. My brother told me once, when he learned about restorative justice, he says, "Sometimes I picture you putting your cape on with the magic R, and you're going out there to, you know,
Mhm.
handle the
Absolutely.
situation." So
Absolutely.
anyway, yeah.
So, in your big idea, you cite two kinds of peacekeeping, right? Standing up for those who can't, and practicing restraint. And to me, those are almost like at two opposite ends of the spectrum. So, can you give us examples of each?
I think about the idea of, obviously standing up for those who, are disenfranchised, or, there's a lot of that that's happening in community today, especially if we think about what's happening in terms of the most recent harms that have occurred in community over the past year, where there's been an outcry for people to stand up for everyone who has been harmed, especially for Black men who have been harmed by law enforcement, who have been trampled in ways, um, it, taken out, if you will, because of what I would call ideas that are generated around white supremacy. And so when we think about the ways that we stand up, we are in community. Sometimes it's protesting, sometimes it's in dialogue, and sometimes it's saying to our neighbors, this is why this is important. Even the whole discussions that we've been having about why Black Lives Matter is one of those ways where people have been standing up for those who have been disenfranchised. So then, kind of on the other hand, there are ways that we can practice restraint. I think about this in some practical ways, and I'm going to just say some things as from my own personal experience as a parent. I have often been in situations where my sons, I have two sons, they're both adults now, but I know that there've been times when I have so wanted to go to bat for them as they were becoming young men. And there would have been times maybe that I could have stepped in and handled a situation because of something that was said by a teacher or in community. I tell you that my favorite thing is the employer situations they've been in. I've so wanted to, but clearly the lessons that they learn on their own by standing up on their own are much more valuable than me stepping in and handling it for them. And so the times that I can practice restraint in not standing in, and I think also just for anyone who may be trying to find their place and find their voice, it's easy to step in, if especially if we feel more confident, but really allowing people to kind of live sometimes in the indifference of things sometimes is a more valuable way for them to find their own path and for us to step back, and we are supportive, we're coaching, we're doing those things in the background, but we're not handling it for them,
Mm,
and taking over. So I
okay.
hope that helps one to understand how we stand up and how we stand back.
Yeah, because I was trying to reconcile that in my mind with being silent, right? And how sometimes being silent can be seen
Mm.
as tacit acceptance or agreement with the thing, whatever that is. So,
I think you bring up something interesting when you say being silent. I think there's a difference between being silent and being supportive. And as I said before, we can be supportive in the background with people and giving them our positive energy. We can give to people individually without standing in front and being the person leading the charge. And I think that's kind of ways that we don't have to. I think silence is sometimes it can be. It's not even just perceived as it can be, it, in a way that we're really not um, giving our very best. But I think there are times when um, in our silence, in our kind of stepping back, that we can still give that positive and supportive energy to a situation.
right. And it's that support piece is really important. It's not like, yeah, yeah, there's a difference in intent
Yep.
um, as well. So let me ask you this. So I am someone who does not like conflict. I don't like making waves. It causes me great stress to disagree with people in any way. What advice do you have for someone like me who wants to, engage in these both types of peacekeeping work, right? The restraint and then the standing up for, but feels a little bit out of my comfort zone.
Sure. And I'll just say honestly, even as an extrovert myself, I don't love it. I get sick to my stomach. I have all of those feelings that make me uncomfortable as well. Um, I would say for anyone who avoids or does not want that, there's a couple of things that I wonder about, um, triggers that based on past experiences might be a driver of that. And so, if you've heard people raise their voices or get hostile, and I'll just say sometimes even people being violent because they don't get their way or they want to push their point, that could be a driver as to why one would want to not engage, and perhaps repel conflict. And so I get that. And I think that sometimes it always is a challenge when the past predicts your future behavior. Um, but I do encourage people to use it as an opportunity to lean in to hear, even through what might be a difficult circumstance, and not to say that there won't be people who aren't kind of along the lines of maybe raising their voices, getting more intense, um, but to really listen for the opportunity, to share. And I also feel like what happens with, people who might avoid conflict is there are moments where one finds their voice. I always, think about, one of the things that one of the largest, fastest growing processes connected to restorative justice is circle process. And some of you may know what I'm talking about, but you're using a talking piece to guide the conversation. Whoever has the talking piece holds the floor. And so in those situations, I find it to be interesting for people who don't, and this is not necessarily about, sometimes it's about conflict, sometimes it's just about finding one's voice in a dialogue. When when that person has the talking piece, they don't have to share. One can pass, and when, one passes, sometimes after several rounds, it feels like, well, how is that person contributing? But I always find it to be wonderful when that person takes an opportunity to share, because it's usually the thing that is amazing about the conversation.
Yeah,
It might be the thing that resolves the conflict itself. And
right.
so I just encourage people who have those tendencies to really just pay attention. I think one finds their voice, especially when it's kind of encroaching on your territory and making it uncomfortable for you. There are ways that people find, an opportunity to say their piece about a situation.
Yeah, now that you mention that, been in conversations, and I actually own a talking stick, right? It was a gift to me. And, I find that in those situations when it is passed to me, it's like giving me permission to find my voice and um, to speak. The other thing that comes up for me too is that, you know, for most of us in our culture, we're not really taught how to really have a conversation I mean, either we're not listening, and especially today, right, we're distracted by phones and everything, or if it's in a place of conflict, lots of times there is what you said, right, the raising of the voice, or and because of heightened emotion at that point in time over whatever the trigger was that we're, having this disagreement about. So,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think in those situations, it's an ideal way for people to build community. That's what I love about circle process, and that's what I love about what I consider to be, when I talked earlier about restorative justice, what it is. I would also say it's movement. It's a movement. And in the movement, we're building community. We're asking the question about how do we want to be together in community. We're not assuming, we're being literal in connecting with each other and saying what's important to you, and how do we do this in a way that is safe, in a way that really holds space for people to feel safe enough to have some difficult conversations sometimes. So,
yeah, and that theme of community keeps, you keep mentioning that. So it gets me to thinking, well, multiple things, but like, it seems like this pandemic time could be a good time for that, right? Because we're all in our homes and, creating community within our families, which, again, because we're so busy, we're off everywhere, right? But it also, I found that during this last year, I've connected more with my relatives who don't live nearby me, right? So I have, monthly Zoom meetings with my aunt and uncle who live in California, right? Or I could, do that with my brother and sister who live in Texas. So in some ways we're connecting more, right? But in other ways, we're also can be more fractured, right? So for example, working from home, right? So we're not creating as much of that community in the workplace, for example. What are your thoughts on my ramblings?
Well, interestingly, you bring up something that we have only kind of thought about in theory for a long time as practitioners. I think about this way that we build community as restorative justice practitioners. We go out in community, we're helping people with their issues, but we're also, you know, participating in physical space in circle. And this idea of could we do this thing virtually and have similar results? And everyone that we were having this conversation with uh, as practitioners at the beginning of COVID, a lot of people were skeptical about, can we hold a circle in virtual space? Could we manage conflict in virtual space? And I'm telling you, a year later, if you had told me a year ago that it would have been as impactful as it was in physical space, I would have told you, shut your mouth. You know, that's blasphemy to our practice, but the truth is, I have participated in more circles because people are valuing the connection. We do virtual circles with great success, and we've done them around a variety of topics. I've participated in circles on a national scale. We've come together around topics of being in COVID. What is it like? I've had people talk about how they felt after the murder of George Floyd. We've come together with educators who were getting prepared to go back into the classroom as we started this fall's schools, and how many of them, what they were grappling with around the country. I participated in circles most recently following the insurrection that happened at the Capitol, and helping people to just make meaning. I participated in Circle in recent times following the announcement of the 2020 election. And what people, just helping people, not so much in a partisan way, but in a nonpartisan way, just have discussion around what this season had been like for them and processing trauma. Um,
Mhm.
and people are still able to translate that into, real connection. um, I've seen more people be more comfortable because they're in their homes, they feel safe, they're in settings that feel familiar. And so then having a way of having a difficult conversation isn't so daunting because they're out of their own spaces. And so in that, it's been rather beautiful to see that transpire. And I know just in the managing of conflict, like doing mediation or a restorative process where there's harm repair that's happening, people are still able to connect in those ways, in similar fashion. They feel the comfort of being in their own space and finding their voice, and not feeling so afraid.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so glad that you've been able to transcend, the challenges that the pandemic has been providing. Um, so you referenced Martin Luther King Jr. in one of his final speeches in your essay, where he speaks about peace in troubled times and being a drum major. So you've kind of referenced this a little bit in what you were just saying, because you referenced a lot of troubled times over the last few months. So how do we find peace in the middle of a storm, right? And we have national storms, which you talked about, right? The George Floyd and the election and things like that. We also have international storms, but also personal and individual ones. So what can we do?
I think I talk about this in terms of the ways that we decide in the moment. There are ways that we live for the future. We're planners, we're doers. And there are ways that we respond, as I was talking about, sometimes the ways that we have seen things happen in our past predict how we're gonna respond in the present. But I think it is making the decision that we are going to be fully present. We are going to be in the moments that we're in, find the joy and the beauty of the moment that we're in, find the connection of the moment that we're in. Who are we talking to process what we're dealing with right now? The thing that causes us a lot of anxiety, I believe, is trying to predict what is going to happen. How am I going to get through to next week? And da 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 da. Or, boy, last week was so bad, I can't even hold my head up to handle what's in the present. But if we take the moment, before everybody came on, we were noting about the light that we were seeing in our screens, and the ways that Kansas weather is so unpredictable. Yesterday, a couple days ago, we had beautiful weather, and last night there was storms and snow, and how in this moment, though, we have some light. And can we, I just think about, can we allow ourselves to connect to that? In this moment, this is all we have right now. This is all we're promised. And so if we can take this opportunity to connect with what is around us right now, and when someone is talking to you, and this is something we talk about in the ways that we train people at Kipkor and in conflict resolution, in good communication, we talk about dismissing what we're about to, what we're thinking of, the next thing that we got to say when someone's talking to us. But we really, truly check in to what someone's telling us now and fully take that in. And in the same ways, we're hoping that the person that we're speaking to is fully taking us in. If we could live more intentionally that way, I think we find the peace in the storm, because it's about the long game, because MLK was talking about so much about the long game, the road to justice, that long road it's hard, but there are daily tasks, daily things that we can do that keep us in the present moment and find the victories in those. I think about the sit-ins that happened in those times during the civil rights movement. Just reading up on some of them, I mean, I can't imagine being a part of a sit-in. I imagine the moments are extremely long and what they had to endure. But if you look at the amount of time, like for instance, the Dockham sit-ins that happened in Wichita, I think it was like a few weeks before the management said, hey, this is not working for us. Let's change our rules, and let's serve everyone. But I bet for those people, if they didn't have that present moment mindset, they couldn't have sat there and endured whatever they had to endure in moments. You think about the long moments that they would had to sit there and endure. But over 3 or 4 weeks, it was over. So, I mean, I think about it that way, that we're in it for the long game, but with the short victories. There are victories in the present moment that we just have to pay attention to.
I love that, paying attention to the present. It's so hard to do because you're right, that anxiety takes over about, oh, what's going to happen, tomorrow or next week, or, oh, I need to make sure that I'm being articulate. So I have to figure out what it is I want to say, those types of things. I have thought about this though. And sometimes I think one of my theories is that, this is why sports have been so popular, right? If you think, particularly the faster ones like basketball or maybe a soccer or football, right? It's because people are in that moment, even though you're not playing and you're watching, especially if you're a super fan, right? You're in that moment. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. You've spoken so much to me this short time we've been speaking. So another question I had was, do you think that we need to accept that there might not be a resolution to some of these storms? So, for example, last week was the first anniversary of the death of Breonna Taylor, right? And that is, one of these national conflicts that is still unresolved. So
I think about the ways that, I said this earlier, but we're in this for the long game. I don't ever accept that there's not a resolution. I don't ever accept that. And the reason why I don't is because I do believe that we have to get out of our own way sometimes. And this is why dialogue is important. I think when we are by ourselves, and a lot of us have been by ourselves, we have been isolated in this past year, it's crazy making sometimes. The ways that our minds work, and we can get caught up in a cycle where it's wash, rinse, repeat. And we have to decide that in order to kind of move past that that moment of this can't be fixed, that we got to put in something different. We even and I will venture to say, if there's another person that we're kind of having this bad road conversation with, we may want to consider bringing in a third party. And I dare say conflict resolution, someone with skills, not just anybody, um, to help mitigate the situation. But there is always some way of lifting out of a situation that feels like it's a dead end. But we have to, again, as I said earlier, about looking for the opportunities. There are always ways that we think about this long game, the long game that we're in terms of the things that are systemic about the ways that we got here, especially when the conflict is something like world peace, like I'm being funny, but if it's something huge, we cannot expect it to be something that we're gonna just snap and it's gonna be something different. But it is the day to day, and the resolution to me is the choices that we make to find those nuggets in conversation, in ways that we're intentionally having dialogue around some of these topics that we're wrestling with. When I talked about circles, the idea that it's wonderful to have circles, to have one dialogue, and we figured something out, we sing kumbaya and we go on our way. Yeah, that doesn't really happen, but it's the idea that there's a one and done. But then there are some circles that meet regularly because there are some things that people are trying to really work out. There are communities in various hamlets around the country, around the world, that do this, where they come together once a week or once a month and they talk about some serious topics. I remember when I lived in the Twin Cities, um, I was a part of a circle where we had people who were from the Israeli state and Palestinian states, those sides meet regularly in community. And they went there. They went there about what should Israel be this? What parts should be Palestinian? I mean, and how they built community. And what came out of that was not world peace. I think in my mind, as a young person, graduate student, trying to wrap my head around how to fix it, I might have jumped the gun a few times, and I go, well, if you did this and all the people decided to do that, in my naive mind, I fixed it, right? I remember one of my teachers saying to me, this isn't about fixing it. This is about them hearing each other and hearing each other's stories and understanding how they might be together in community. And some of these people, they go play golf together after it was over, or get a cup of coffee. Or if they saw each other in community, they were a little less like, you're from the other side. But it was more about, this is an okay person. This person has some really good ideas. And all the other ways that we can be in community and yet have difference. So ongoing conversations can be a way of staying in that long game. But ultimately, there's in resolution is such a big word, but there are always ways that we can rise above whatever it is that we're in at the time if we're willing to allow ourselves to transcend by connecting in community intentionally around these issues and not getting stuck in our own heads or stuck in the same back and forth conversation with another individual or whatever, where it really does merit getting outside help.
Yeah, and I can see where resolution is like another one of those points of looking forward. So we have our first question, and if anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. So Julie says, I was struck by the comment that restorative justice is a movement. We are building community, and what do we want? What is important? What is safe? So how has the vision and work of peacemaking changed over the generations?
Well, I'm not that old, so changed over generations. Well, I would say, and I think about this in terms of the ways that we think about what that is. There's peacekeeping, um, peace. Um, it's not the same as being peaceful, and I think that it implies work. I will say this: one of the ways that we have paid closer attention is peacekeeping is a discipline. Although I would say it's been around in terms of, you can go, like at Bethel, a student can get a minor in a peace studies minor. I think that paying more attention to how this is done has been one of the ways. that we have advanced in our understandings and putting it as a something that's more of an importance in society. The other way that I think we are leaning more in is how it's important, not just in the ways of one person kind of having this as a minor or whatever, but other disciplines are seeing the importance of it as well. For instance, over the past few years at Bethel, we have been teaching peace resolution or conflict resolution to nurses because we know that in the healthcare field, there's a lot of conflict resolution that occurs or that is needed. I'll say it that way, that is needed. And I just, as a matter of fact, had someone call me the other day saying, we want to fully, we want to enlist KIPkor to help us to educate a cohort of employees who are, it's all nursing staff at this particular clinic, and they want to have everyone take this course as a result of this one person who is the nurse manager. She had been through our course years ago, and said that's how she got her job because they saw that she had this credential. And so just thinking about all the ways that we have advanced in understanding how important it is. um, I think we think about it a lot where it's connected to government. It's connected to, you know, a lot of other things, but we didn't really touch on this, but we also train educators in the state of Kansas in restorative practices because we know that what is happening in schools is that schools aren't just the place where kids plug in to just go to school, get their lessons, go home. School is its own community, it's its own ecosystem. And with it comes a variety of challenges. And some of that is connected to discipline, some of it is around this idea that we talked about with community building. And so the idea that we are teaching people how to be together in that community is another way of, you know, helping in terms of brokering peace, especially in situations where we know what happens in schools when it doesn't, when those types of things aren't paid attention to. So those are just some thoughts about the advancement of what I would call modern day peacekeeping or peacemaking.
Yeah, and we have some chats that some comments in the chat. That's what you were saying stimulated some thoughts. So Dee Dee says that she's reminded of a story about towns with the same names, one in Tennessee and the other one in Massachusetts, and they've been meeting in person and online for about 18 months. But they were afraid to meet each other because of potential political differences. But by building community, they've become more comfortable with one another. So that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
I like that.
So that's kind of cool. I wonder what this, I'll have to go look that up. Well, I'm trying to figure out what city that is. Yeah.
Yeah. She has another comment and question. She said she attended a restorative justice lecture that discussed inmates meeting the victims of their crimes. Does your work include these settings?
Yes, I actually have done that myself. I've worked with inmates who, and I'll say, I've worked with people who have been harmed. Either they've been the victims directly of the person who is incarcerated, or they've taken the person that's incarcerated has taken the life of a loved one, and the person that's wanting to meet with them is a family member that wants answers. And it might be part of their healing journey. So I consider those times to be some of the most meaningful experiences. And I will tell you, as a person who is trained, what I am trained to do in those situations is hold space, bear witness, be as supportive as I can on all sides. Um, it is some of the most meaningful work that I can do. You're talking about working together with people over months to prepare them for such an occasion. And for many of these individuals, they will say that it is the conversation of their lives. Um, when I have had those opportunities, I don't take it for granted. I do a lot of preparation with all parties involved. Um, I also make sure that all of these individuals have the appropriate psychological help. I am not a therapist, and I don't wear that hat in that role, but I make sure that they have the mental health services that they need to help them process and undergird their mental health throughout this, because it can be very stressful. If you can imagine, if someone has committed a crime, that they've taken a life and they're coming to terms with that, all that they would be going through. If you could imagine someone who's meeting with someone who's taken away, someone who is so precious to them, and all of the trauma that they would be going through, they need those services to help. And I would want to make sure they have that. I'd also want to make sure that they have support people, because I'm not able to be the support person if I'm facilitating in a way, or holding space in that way as well. So I do all of those things to ensure that it is a safe and appropriate situation. So with that, it's powerful, um, powerful experiences, and for um, some of these experiences have been hours in terms of the actual face-to-face meeting, and then of course after the meetings, there's a lot of follow-up, because there's a lot of things to process out. And sometimes these folks don't meet just one time, they might meet more than one time to kind of sift through everything that they want to know, and the conversations that they want to have.
Yeah, sounds powerful. So Julie made a comment based on your comment about the nurses that you've been working, and she said that she knows library personnel also have to take conflict resolution training, and so your comment about nurses was also really interesting. So we have also a question from Leanne. She says, you talked a bit about the difference between silence and support earlier. I think a lot about how to be an ally and support marginalized communities as a white cisgender woman without centering myself. How can the concepts of peacekeeping and restorative justice help inform being a good ally?
Okay, so I'm going to say a couple things about that, and this may push the envelope a little bit. I think that being an ally is wonderful. I think that someone who is, and I'm using a word that the kids use, woke, that suggests that you are well read, you understand, you have an understanding of how to be anti-racist. I think that's important. But I'm going to push the envelope a little bit and say that as an ally, sometimes it is easy to not go the distance with the person that you are supporting in your allyship. And there's another word I want you to think about embracing, and it is being an accomplice. And if you think about what an accomplice is, it is a person that you are lockstep with. It is a person that if I go down, you go down. It is a person that is someone who doesn't take the exit strategy of this is getting hard. This is meaning that it comes at a cost to me, and so therefore I can opt out. It means that I am staying in community with you as you go through the person that is the marginalized individual, person of color, going through an experience that is probably traumatizing for them, having somebody right alongside them. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to do everything that they do, but you are holding space, you are there, you are not taking the easy way out when things get hard. You are not opting out when it may come at a cost to you. I write about this in one of the books that I've suggested is Colorizing Restorative Justice, and it is a little more nuanced, and it's not the 101 theory about restorative justice, but it is filtered through the lenses of people of color who've been writing about their experience as practitioners. And my particular lived experience is my chapter is called Calling Out Whiteness, and my chapter discusses this idea of being an accomplice, thinking about ways to dismantle white supremacy in circumstances. So I encourage you to think about it that way, and if you can, consider looking at the material that I've provided to give you some understanding on a deeper level.
Thank you. Yeah, I just learned about that, the term accomplice, in an anti-racism training that
Mm.
that I'm using. So, but it wasn't as explained. And I really appreciate, how you define it. Yeah, and making that distinction between accomplice and ally, as Esther mentions in the chat. And Leanne says thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So can you tell us a little bit about kipkor and some of its initiatives? I was on your website the other day, and I know you have a speaker coming up. I believe it's next month that I was really excited about. So I'll give you a platform to talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, the speaker that's coming next month, which you should all want to connect with, is Leonard Pitts, journalist, opinion writer for the Miami Herald. And he has been to kipkor in person well before COVID in 2017. And it was the most well-attended event in this whole area. I think it was over 1,500 folks who showed up and packed out our Memorial Hall for his speech, and he spoke on the controversial speech about what now, if America in the age of Trump, and he's going to do a sequel to that in his upcoming live stream event that we'll do next month. So please come to our website, register, and attend. That will be on April 25th from 2 to 5 p.m. And we look forward to that very much. But kipkor is, as I mentioned before, we are a peace building institution. We have been around for 35 years. And we do everything from, as I mentioned, we're a full service conflict resolution mediation center, where we have people who you can literally come in off the street, or we train, and we train mediators. We train folks in the community who just want to have better conflict resolution skills. I mean, if you are just wanting to refine some of the things that you think or you want to do things better for the purposes of your job, or just to be a better communicator, you could take a course from us or a training. We also we are connected to Bethel College. We're an affiliate of Bethel, and so students take courses from us. We have a conflict resolution certificate program, which is highly unique. There are very few colleges around the nation that offer a conflict resolution certificate, and so that is something to consider. Uh, we also have a minor that we just we're having the first cohort of students come through with a minor in criminal and restorative justice. So that is something we're very proud to have, that distinction. We train educators, as I mentioned, in restorative practices throughout the state of Kansas. We have the distinction of having trained over 1,000 teachers in the state of Kansas over the past decade in restorative practices. There are so many things. We've had this peace lecture series going for, this will be the 50th year coming up. In the next year, we will have had this lecture series going. That has started at Bethel, and Kipkor has kind of taken it on as we have been in service for 35 years. And we've had speakers come from all around the world to speak to our community. And we have an excellent cohort of people who hold us all together. We're able to bring in trainers and speakers from around the country who do great work in conflict resolution, and we have access to them in ways of now especially through virtual connection. But yeah, so that gives you a taste of all that we offer at Kipkor.
Yeah, you're a busy woman. Well, thank you so much. This has been an informative and impactful hour, and we really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Sheryl. What a wonderful conversation that you allowed us to be a part of. I have taken away so many notes and things that I want to do some personal reading about, and I'm imagine every single person on this Zoom event feels the same way. So thank you so much to everyone who did join today. The Big Idea is something that we value and is really important part of our programming. So you'll want to stay tuned for next month. I believe our Big Idea is scheduled for April 22nd. We'll be getting that word out here fairly quickly, and it will be another opportunity that you won't want to miss. This time we'll be talking to musicians and historians, Lemuel Shepard from Pittsburgh and Cash Hollister from Salina, talking about the intersection between African-American poetry and music. So we won't want to miss that. And again, my great thanks to Sheryl Wilson and Valerie Mendoza for today's really remarkable event. Thanks so much, everyone. Take good care.